Good afternoon. My name is Robert Jacobs, and I'm a historian at the Hiroshima Peace Institute of Hiroshima City University. I'm speaking to you from Hiroshima, Japan. I'm honored to be able to share my views with you at this esteemed round table. I thank the organizers for inviting my comments, and I thank you all for listening. I'll be talking today about the meltdowns and massive releases of radiation that happened here in Japan last year at Fukushima after the devastating earthquake. Specifically, I'll be speaking about whether the nuclear crisis was caused by the tsunami, as is claimed, or by the earthquake that preceded the tsunami. First, I'll briefly review the crisis. On March 11, 2011, at 2:46 in the afternoon, a 9-point earthquake struck about 70 kilometers offshore of northern Japan. The earthquake shook violently for over 5 minutes. Buildings in Tokyo, 373 kilometers away, rocked badly, and oil refineries in the Tokyo suburbs caught fire. It was the largest recorded earthquake in Japanese history, and one of the 5 largest earthquakes since the beginning of record-keeping about earthquakes. At 3:35, 49 minutes later, a 14-meter tsunami wave hit the Fukushima nuclear complex, flooding over the seawalls and inundating nuclear plant units 1, 2, 3, and 4. These two events, the earthquake and the tsunami, substantially exceeded safety design assumptions for the nuclear power plants. They had been designed to withstand an earthquake of 8.2 and had a seawall built to withstand a tsunami of 5.7 meters. The earthquake that struck on 3/11 was 8 times larger than design assumptions, and the tsunami was more than twice as high as the design assumptions. The plant designers had assumed that they built the plant to withstand any earthquake and tsunami that was likely for over 1,000 years. These assumptions were wrong. Fukushima Units 1, 2, and 3 were operating at the time of the earthquake. Unit 4 was shut down for routine maintenance and refueling. The 3 operating plants all experienced total meltdown of their nuclear fuel. Unit 4 lost cooling to its large pool of spent fuel rods, and this fuel experienced significant melting as well. All 4 plants experienced explosions that dispersed radioactive material into the ocean, but also across large areas of northern Japan, including many parts of Tokyo. TEPCO, the company that runs the plants, and the government of Japan denied that there had been any meltdowns at Fukushima for over 2 months, even though they knew for certain that there had been meltdowns during the first week of the crisis. They deliberately lied for months. This increased the exposure to tens of thousands of local residents. Both TEPCO and the government of Japan lied repeatedly about many aspects of the crisis. However, after finally publicly admitting to the meltdowns, one claim that they made and have been repeating since March 11th is that the meltdowns were caused by the tsunami and not by the earthquake. They claim that the plants all shut down safely, exactly as designed, and only when the tsunami flooded the backup generators, which cut off electrical power, did the plants lose cooling and start to melt down. Since we know that TEPCO and the government of Japan lied for months about the meltdowns and other aspects of the crisis, the question I ask you is, should we believe their claim that the tsunami and not the earthquake is the sole cause of the meltdowns? Let's look at some of the evidence that has come to light that shows there was substantial damage to the plants, specifically Unit 1, from the earthquake, and that large releases of radiation had already begun before the tsunami hit. David McNeil and Jake Adelstein interviewed several TEPCO workers who were at the plants when the earthquake and tsunami both hit. They spoke on conditions of anonymity since they were still working for TEPCO at that time. One worker told them, "I personally saw pipes that came apart, and I assume that there were many more that had been broken throughout the plant. There's no doubt that the earthquake did a lot of damage inside the plant. There were definitely leaking pipes. I also saw that part of the wall of the turbine building for Unit 1 had come away. That crack might have affected the reactor." Another worker told them, "The first impact of the earthquake was so intense you could see the building shaking, the pipes buckling, and within minutes I saw pipes bursting. Some fell off the wall, others snapped. The workers were ordered to evacuate the plant, but, says this second worker, I was severely alarmed because as I was leaving, I could see that several pipes had cracked open, including what I believed were cold water supply pipes. That would mean that the coolant couldn't get to the reactor core. If you can't sufficiently get the coolant to the core, it melts down. He told them that as he was headed to his car, he could see the walls of the Unit 1 building had already started to collapse. He said there were holes in them in the first few minutes. Another worker reported that, quote, I was in a building nearby when the earthquake shook. After the second shockwave hit, I heard a loud explosion that was almost deafening. I looked out the window and I could see white smoke coming from Reactor 1. I thought to myself, this is the end. Katsunobu Onda, author of the 2007 book, TEPCO: The Dark Empire, notes that, quote, nuclear reactors are only as strong as their weakest links, and those links are the pipes. The pipes, which regulate the heart of the reactor and carry coolant, are the veins and arteries of a nuclear power plant. The core is the heart. If the pipes burst, vital components don't reach the heart, and thus you have a heart attack. In nuclear terms, meltdown, says Onda. Once the meltdowns were publicly admitted, and many outside observers knew that there had been meltdowns during the first week, but once they were publicly admitted by TEPCO, the company released some documents showing readings from the plant during that first week. Among the data contained in these documents was the reading of one of the only functioning radiation monitors at the site. It showed that a radiation alarm had gone off at a distance of 1.5 kilometers away from Unit 1 at 3:29. This was more than 5 minutes before the tsunami flooded the plants. Nuclear plant designer Mitsuhiko Tanaka described what occurred on March 11th as a loss of coolant accident. Tanaka says, quote, the data that TEPCO has made public shows a huge loss of coolant within the first few hours of the earthquake. It can't be accounted for by the loss of electrical power. There was already so much damage to the coolant system that a meltdown was inevitable long before the tsunami came. Tanaka cites evidence in TEPCO's own data that within minutes of the earthquake, 2 emergency coolant systems of Unit 1 started up, and that the water sprayer inside of the reactor vessel of Unit 1 turned on. Tanaka advises that, quote, this only happens when there is a loss of coolant. So why, with this evidence clearly available, does TEPCO, the government of Japan, and the nuclear industry worldwide maintain that it was the tsunami and not the earthquake that caused the meltdown of Unit 1? Because if they admit that the earthquake caused Unit 1 to melt down, then all of the nuclear power plants in Japan, and also in many other parts of the world, would have to be shut down. Many of these plants sit in dangerous earthquake fault zones. They are allowed to operate only because their owners assure governments and the public that it is impossible for a large earthquake to cause a meltdown. They have to insist that the Fukushima crisis was caused by the tsunami and not by the earthquake. They have to make these claims to protect their investments, even if the result is to expose millions around the world to the dangers of nuclear meltdowns. So even as TEPCO has finally admitted that there were indeed meltdowns at Fukushima, it shifted its large public relations efforts to maintaining the lie that those meltdowns were not caused by the massive earthquake. I tell you today that there is no reason to believe this claim by TEPCO. It's another lie. Thank you very much.